Alright, this is a nice little one here, but haven't actually written anything down, just a little reminder from so I need to record it at some point. I'll try and get it off the top of my head, which means it's going to be even worse than the written ones, so hard luck me. I think I've put it into words before, but it's long been my belief, or long been my kind of perspective. I just have... Well, it's just the way I go through the world. I kind of have unconditional contempt for human beings, myself included. Although, of course, myself less, because there's still a little bit of narcissism in there somewhere. Anyway, and I've always thought this was impenetrable or immovable. Just kind of my natural reaction to the thing, and I wonder if you could alter it at all. But, and probably thanks to the old recent lapse into Jordan Peterson's world. But also, I mean, so I'm nearer to the end now of the second Jordan Peterson Sam Harris podcast for the third time, and I even on the third time, and now I'm still more sympathetic towards Jordan. I still think Sam kind of wipes the floor with him a little bit. Not wipes the floor with him, but they're just kind of getting at different things, and Jordan isn't. I think Sam is kind of making more logical sense of what Jordan's saying than Jordan is making any sense of what Sam's saying and actually understand where he's going. And I think Jordan keeps trying to follow the wrong paths, so he's not actually addressing what Sam's talking about, but, never mind. There's still some value to what he's talking about, but sadly, Sam is just, Anyway. So my unconditional contempt for humans, right? It actually happened when I was watching... So I've never been a big fan of Ricky Gervais as a person. I quite like extras, obviously, in The Office. But I've always thought he was a bit narcissistic. He obviously does that as a character, but I think the character is based on himself a little bit. His characters in shows aren't the narcissist, but his stand-up and his public persona plays on narcissism, but I think that's based in his real, actual narcissism. Anyway, a little bit. It's multi-layered, multi-layered. While I was watching his recent stand-up Netflix special thing, Humanity, I didn't really like it that much. There were some bits which are actually quite funny, but I've never been a big fan of his stand-up, and I think he likes to try and make it as much of a science as possible, because he likes to think that he's, profligating science, not the word. And it's just not as good. He's just not as good a comedian as Louis C.K. and the others. I remember him being in that. He's obviously good friends with Louis C.K. Anywho, but for whatever reason, the thought just passed through my head of just not having contempt for him, it wasn't his real fault that I didn't like him, right? Or I didn't like humans in general. But it seemed to me that he was actually trying a little bit. And it's hard to get around this because, everyone's kind of not... It's not a matter of trying... Everyone's trying to some respect, right? And there was a little bit of sympathy that came through with it. And I think the contempt for me was born out of my ideal of the artificial intelligence super race that could be 100, it's a matter of centuries away, probably. But I was bored of... I wanted that now, and I was comparing us to them, what we would eventually be. But obviously, if you do that, you're always going to... Well, you can always hope to improve. So you're going to be comparing yourself to something better, and then whatever you have at the moment will be insufficient. That's the classic problem of happiness, is that people think whatever they have now is insufficient for them to make them happy, but if they only had one other thing, it would make them happy. That's not really what I was getting at. I was just kind of, but not quite. Grass is always greener, all these phrases, right? But there are a couple of reasons for why it's obviously better to not have a contemptuous outlook on human life. One, because it allows you to be happier, and I'm getting down to... I'm trying to work out all the things, the best formula for making yourself have the best subjective experience. And that would probably be one of the things. I think the Stoics or someone had said to always try to find the best in people. So yeah, that's another one. I mean, I think all people stumble across this in something, and you can describe it to the Stoics, you can describe it to fucking Jesus if you want, you can say it was a bloody emoji movie. Doesn't really matter, right? Who said it, or what. You don't have to subscribe to the rest of everything they say. Just because they've got one thing possibly right doesn't mean everything else is right. Anyway, I'm right about subjective experience, okay? So don't fuck with me. And the second thing is, the only way we're going to get to that promised land that I was talking about with the AI super race, that just better, far more capable of experiencing, having far superior experiences than us, just everything about them rendering us useless, is what we should hope for. We should hope to be surpassed in every way, right? Then the way to get there is more likely a positive outlook, or one that inspires people to at least try. And I think if I go around, well, there's always a flip side to this. So I always think that there is some utility to pretty much most things, and the contemptuous side is, maybe people would try harder. But anyway, look, I'm not as contemptuous now at this exact moment, although I'm saying that it doesn't mean I'm necessarily feeling it, but I think I'm feeling it a little bit. But there we go. That's the words that I've said. Here's another little thing. So I've just reached another point in the podcast there. And this is the point where Jordan's talking about the Christ story being the perfect tragedy, all that rubbish. And then Sam suggests how it could be more tragic, but in the wrong kind of way, really. I'd say, he just didn't have enough things wrong with him. I mean, Sam says he could be fucked by the cosmos, basically, and that would be more tragic, and he's right. But then Jordan says transcending that is the part that makes it perfect, really, or whatever. Anyway, it would be more tragic if he had, because Jesus obviously has a positive enough outlook on life, which is at least in part down to your neurochemistry and your biology, to not hate it or be suicidal or megalomaniacal or any of those things. So the true tragedy would be someone who, and it's sometimes suspected that these are the people that actually wrote the Bible, with mental disorders, OCD, schizophrenia, just depression. Let's say he was severely depressed, clinically depressed, and it was non-psychological. Well, it was obviously psychological to some degree, but just due to a chemical imbalance in his brain genetically. And there was nothing that could really be done about it in those times, obviously. And that would be a true tragedy in my eyes. And this is also what Camus said about Sisyphus, right? We have to imagine Sisyphus happy, and this is the thing that annoyed me the most about everything. It's just this ridiculous leap to we have to imagine him happy. Why? Why the fuck should we? What if he's depressed? What if he has a genetic disorder which inclines him towards depression, and therefore makes life not worth living? What if his life is so awful, devoid of any possible way of deriving meaning from anything he does, or enjoyment from anything he does, or pleasure, or any of those things that are just not present? He has all the necessary wiring and neurotransmitters available for suffering, but none of the ones for the positive things that counter suffering, right? Well, then how can we not just we have to, but how could we? Not just do we not have to imagine him happy? How could we ever imagine him happy? And this is essentially what Jordan suggests we should all do. Is we should all take on the suffering voluntarily, and also what the Buddha says, right? But at least the Buddha prescribes a way of getting there. Supposedly, if you concentrate hard enough on just the nature of consciousness, then you'll find something that transcends it, right? Actually transcends it, rather than just saying it transcends it. Well, because I haven't experienced it, I can't actually give any validity, but I'd say Sam is a credible person. He seems to reckon there's something to it. Anywho, but Jordan Peterson is known to be on antidepressants, I believe. He's said on multiple occasions that he takes antidepressants, SSRIs, and also recommends them, and likens them to people's diabetes insulin medication. Diabetes. That's me copying back from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Diabetes. Diabetes. So, surely that's not accepting your suffering. Surely if just accepting your suffering is enough, why would you need to take antidepressant medication? Right? I would imagine he'd respond with something like, you have to bring it to a manageable level. But what if you can't? What if you can't actually bring it to a manageable level? That's where the problem lies, is that it's not a matter of any amount of suffering is surmountable by just accepting it, right? It's just there is some level of suffering which can be brought to a level which is sufferable, literally sufferable. You can suffer it and it not make life not worth living. And that's what I would argue he has done, and most people with depression should try to do. But I don't doubt for a second that there are people for whom that is not a possibility. Anyway, so yeah, accepting the suffering in the most literal sense would mean to not take antidepressants, surely. Anyway, whatever. We'll leave it at that. Alright, just gonna get these off so I can kill a few birds. Oh god, I want to kill some birds. But kill some birds with one stone, you know. I'll just read them out, and then if I need to add anything to them I can. I was considering the ramifications of a well-raised child in an unprivileged neighbourhood, and it occurred to me that if the morally educated begin to implement a more altruistic lifestyle, one of the consequences would be to not be able to afford to live in for these people would be to not be able to afford to live in areas secluded from these underprivileged communities. If some parents were inclined to donate the majority of their wealth to charitable causes and live on only what was sufficient to provide them with life's necessities by our modern privileged standards, privileged. Oh my god, not in that sense, but you know, obviously nowadays we expect pretty decent shelter and pretty decent food to remain well nourished, obviously. Anyway, and raised their children with a strong sense of the values of intellectual pursuits and a theory of ethics, and was subsequently well read, then perhaps their assimilation in a community in which these qualities were less well regarded, perhaps the community would be exposed. You don't need to say perhaps community. Perhaps then they would be exposed to ideas. The community then. Maybe it's necessary. Anyway, would be exposed to ideas and incentives and an understanding of how to best act on these incentives that they otherwise might not be open to consider. Essentially, the benefits of an altruistic lifestyle stretch beyond the immediate and might be a way of reducing the stratification of society. Basically, I just had this idea of, I was walking past a kind of chavvy-looking character with his chavvy-looking female friend, but they didn't seem, they seemed quite decent-ish people. I heard a snippet of the conversation I couldn't actually hear, but they weren't speaking in any untoward way. I'm just wondering, I quite like the idea of a kind of, I don't think it's that new an idea, but like a smart chav, really. You know, like a kind of, and just by dint of them being, well, not forced into a more chavvy community, the only way, I suppose they could be ostracised, but I don't know, it seems like there could be a story there or something. Anyway, I'm just going to leave it. I can't be bothered. I think another issue I have with Jordan Peterson's approach to archetypes is not only his choice of for the source of them, but also the kind of tack-on nature he seems to recommend. The way he identifies the attributes which make a hero opens them up, or at least doesn't close them off, to the idea that someone can superficially do the thing that makes it look like they hold whichever values the hero would actually hold, whilst not actually holding them. A kind of fake it till you make it policy. I don't claim that Jordan intentionally does this, but I think his failure to address it could hinder the positive effects of what he is trying to teach. I think something that most of us are familiar with, and which would become a far more transferable reaction, is that which one might have experienced when copying an answer to a maths question that you are unable to solve. The "why do they do that" moment that causes you to think and ask questions until you know the reason it was the true solution to the problem. I see no reason this shouldn't be a feature found in the reading of good fiction, if it truly is good fiction. And in fact, fiction writers should be seeking to evoke this reaction from people, assuming not all people are perfect moral heroes already, or at least not even in their minds. So yeah, just that moment. If you've ever struggled with a maths question, and then you looked at someone else's work, and they just did a step that you weren't expecting, and you don't understand where that step came from or something like that should appear to you in fiction, and you should take pause when they arise and, try and work out whether it's wisdom or folly. Okay, I think this is okay, I think this will hopefully be my final take on Jordan Peterson's archetype thingamajig. I think the ideal of the perfect man, woman, or whatever, is something that we all hold a vague notion of in our heads that develops with time. There's nothing magical or mysterious about it, really. We all just recognise attributes we find desirable and admirable and useful, and through arts and discussion, and by acting them out, we make arguments to try to influence what the cultural archetype should be and is. Maybe there's a better word than archetype, because maybe it's got too many connotations, but I don't know. Ideal probably just fits it. Ideal? I don't know. Anyway, for some people, however, due to faults in their development or genetics, the ability to, or maybe some other one, the ability to infer these archetypes from these ideals, from the subliminal behaviours and signals found in their culture and community, a more distilled version may be required, and perhaps a more solidified ideal is necessary. Now, this could be Jesus, it could be Batman, as Sam said so perfectly, but there should be no doubt that people who have been denied proper assimilation should be entitled to some sort of role model that acts as a cheat sheet for finding a way that's best for them and the people they will come in contact with. So yeah, that's that really. I'm not sure I can be bothered to come up with anything else to say on it. I just don't really see. I think I did see one maybe possible benefit of religion over just general fit. What was the one? I don't think I do anymore. I can't remember what it was anyway. I think for the most part, finding a book that's maybe religions are meant to be the most generic. Maybe they're a good generic one, but I think and also I've suggested you should find one that's most relatable to you, but I don't think religion is. Maybe it's accessible. I guess the only argument you could make for it is that you might do more harm by finding a book that's not as relevant or relatable, or fiction or film or whatever, or just role model ideal that misses the mark for one person, and maybe religion is the closest to the norm, right? But I just don't think it is. I think, well, maybe it is. Maybe it's not. I don't know enough about it yet, but I'd say probably not. I'd say that you'd be better. I don't think it's hard to find a fucking good book or film, superhero, whatever, person that exists in the world that does, a better job. But there we go. Because the problem with religion is that you can't, it's too easy to say that you can't get rid of all the bad stuff because it's supposedly either revelation or. Because they add on the magical stuff, you can't. It's hard for people to just read it as a fiction novel, and that's one of the real problems. That and the fact that it doesn't adapt over time. Anyway, that'll do.